Illinois faces some big challenges. Today, we're about to hear a truly honest analysis of the problems we face. Equally as important, you'll also hear an in-depth discussion of some practical solutions. This is your radio source for stories, the insight, and the answers you won't hear anywhere else. Not in the media and not coming from Springfield. You're listening to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute. Now, here's your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Welcome to another edition of Illinois Rising. I'm Dan Proft, Morning Drive co-host of Chicago's Morning Answer with Amy Jacobson, AM 560, Monday through Friday, 5 to 9 a.m. And with me this week is Pat Hughes, co-founder of the Illinois Opportunity Project. And what a week it was, Pat, as we careen towards the end of another legislative session. Senate Democrats, in a bit of a surprise move, at least to me, decided to end the budget negotiations to try and resolve the impasse. That is a combination of tax increases and spend reforms. At least that's been the discussion framework. And just go ahead and pass a 32% increase in the state income tax with no reforms. And they made no bones about it. John Cullerton just basically saying, hey, we did something, as if doing something regardless of impact is necessarily a positive thing.
Yeah, Dan, this is a gift to the Republicans. It's a gift to Governor Rauner if he uses it correctly. I don't see the House taking this up because, look, the Senate's got some safe districts coming up in 2018, so they can take a position on this. The House has got some issues, though. There are 12 or 13 target races in the House, and I don't see them wanting to vote on a tax increase without structural reform. But the governor and the Republicans should run with this and say, Democrats just voted to increase your taxes by whatever number, and there is no structural reform to back it up. There's no property tax relief of any kind, and they should run with this politically. I think they started to do that this week.
And by the way, also this week, Governor Rauner said, any deal that I sign on to, even though I'm open-minded on tax increases, if I get spending reforms, but any deal must include real long-term property tax relief. That is a must-have for any deal to be done between now and the end of the month. So that was a positive development on the tax relief side. And to your point, just to be clear, 32-26 margin in the Senate. No Republican voted for that standalone income tax increase. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Ted Dabrowski, Vice President of Policy at the Illinois Policy Institute. Ted, give us the breakdown on what Senate Bill 9 does. This is the tax increase bill the Senate Democrats voted up, and what its impact would be if it was actually sent to the governor's desk and either signed or implemented through overriding a veto.
Yeah, so this bill, would raise $5.4 billion on Illinoisans, and it's you're talking about on average a household increase, tax increase of over $1,000. So it's very painful, and it's one of these deals where the Democrats, the press, a lot of the civic organizations like Civic Fed and BGA, they all want everybody to think that this is the only thing to do, that this is the only way to fix Illinois. And they're basically thinking all Illinoisans are naive. But what we know is that Illinoisans don't want tax hikes. They're fed up with the government. They're fed up with paying so much. And this is just another part of the plan to keep the status quo and keep treating taxpayers like ATMs.
Well, and just to accentuate that point, Illinois Policy Institute commissioned a survey done by Fabrizio and Lee, a respected D.C. polling firm, and it finds on this question, two-thirds of Illinoisans, two-thirds of likely voters in 2018 oppose a state budget that includes raising the state income tax. Two-thirds. In a budget that includes raising the state sales tax, which this does sort of by expanding it to certain services, is almost three-quarters of Illinoisans oppose it. So it seems to me like you're talking about these goo-goo groups like BGA and Civic Fed and the Chicago Press Corps and the Springfield Press Corps. They think one thing inside of this little bubble, and then there's millions of Illinois families around the state that think something very different.
No, absolutely. I think most Illinoisans have struggled in this economy that we've had in Illinois that's been way, way far behind the rest of the national recovery. And, to take another about $1,100, to take that out of people's incomes, where people's incomes have either been flat or down over the last decade, it means a lot, right? We're not talking about taking $1,000 from $50,000, their whole income. We're talking about taking $1,000 after people have paid, their mortgages, their car payments, their property taxes. This is what's $1,000 of what's left, and you're talking about a lot of pain for people. That's why I think you see 2/3 oppose that. You see 3/4 oppose sales taxes. People aren't stupid, and that's why people have been leaving. And you've talked a lot about how people are being squeezed out of their homes. They can't afford another $1,000 on top of that.
Yeah, Ted. So the issue for me is, there's always these forget about the tax and think about the rosy revenue projections. We're going to get $5.4 billion. It's going to close the budget hole. But isn't the reality that we collect less and less revenue and taxes? And if you increase this tax over time, that's going to be the case too, because people aren't going to lose their jobs because it's going to be too expensive to employ them. There's going to be out migration, so they're going to leave, and ultimately the tax base is going to dwindle. That budget hole, even if it could get filled with $5.4 billion, isn't going to be something that'll be filled next year or the year after that. And unless there's structural reform, major spending reforms, this isn't going to solve anything over any period of time.
No, it doesn't solve anything. Actually, it makes things worse, right? Because they just paper over the problems. And we did this in 2011 when we had that record income tax hike. It raised $32 billion in new tax dollars. They papered over all the problems. They spent all that money. Nothing was fixed, and they left us on a cliff. And here we are again. We're going to have the same solution. And so, I think what we got to take from all this and from the poll results is that it's good policy and good politics to solve our state problems by spending reforms, not through tax hikes. People don't want tax hikes. People want spending reforms. And if we take any message from what's happened at the national elections, people are fed up. And so this is the chance to listen to the people and give them what they want rather than what the political elite wants, which is just more tax hikes and more control over people's lives.
Well, and I mean, think about how massive this tax hike is that the Senate Democrats passed. So the 32% increase in the state income tax, the corporate income tax rate goes from 5.25 to 7 in a state that is hemorrhaging jobs and businesses. Expands the sales tax to laundry and dry cleaning services, as well as storage and other services to bring in another half a yard, $55 million. Raises taxes on cable and satellite TVs. Closes corporate loopholes worth a reported $125 million. All that. And that's $5 billion. And we're projected right now, the end of this fiscal year, to have $14 billion, 3 times that almost, in just unpaid bills. So the idea of not just including spending reforms, but spending reforms being the thrust of it to completely reorder state government so that you don't incur obligations you can't finance, that's the only conversation we should be having.
Well, and back to Pat's point, look, not only is $5 billion, when you keep running the government the way you do, $5 billion isn't enough to cover these unpaid bills and the way these pensions grow out of control. So you can just expect, if they're not going to reform it, we're just going to need more and more and more. And to Pat's point, as long as people keep leaving and companies leave, then the tax base is shrinking. And so these bills that are growing are left with a smaller and smaller population, until the bills become so high for everybody that either we'll just go bankrupt or people flee even faster. And there's great states around Illinois, right? There's other places to live at some point rather than keep paying excessive bills. And
a report out this week again, Chicago in real terms losing population in 2016, losing twice as much population as lost in 2015. And this is after the west side and the south sides of the city have been hollowed out. Now you're talking about the city center, the revenue producing areas of the city.
Well, I think it's the big fear, and I think it's what I spoke to Moody's Investor Services rating agency the other day. They still don't think out-migration is a problem, but when you look at and I think they're part of the group that thinks that tax hikes are the way to fix Illinois. When you look at that migration, you've got to be concerned that people will continue to vote with their feet as long as we continue to be corrupt and overspend.
So, Ted, what should we do instead?
Well, I tell you this. One of my concerns is I said good policy and good politics are both spending reforms, not tax hikes. And I think we've got to really push not just the legislature but Governor Rauner as well. I'm concerned that right now his latest message is, listen, I'm going to raise your taxes, but in exchange for that, I'm going to cap your nation's highest property taxes. That's not a good trade-off for the Illinois people. That's not what they want to hear. They don't want to pay more taxes and have their highest property taxes capped. That's not good enough.
Not capped, frozen, not capped.
Sorry, frozen, yeah. We got to do better than that, and that means no tax hike and figure out how to get those property taxes down. And so we've got a whole bunch of reforms that we've proposed to the Illinois Policy Institute. We put out a full plan of how to attack the property tax problem is a symptom, or the property tax payments people make is a symptom of the problems of all these things that raise spending. We got to cut those things. And then we've got to reform pensions. We've laid out a plan that allows us to balance the budget without a tax hike. And if this is what the people want, then we've got to get the legislators to start looking at a plan like ours or a competing plan, any plan that wants to attack the reforms and not just tax people.
He is Ted Dabrowski, VP of Policy at the Illinois Policy Institute. IllinoisPolicy.org is where you can find that balanced budget that Ted largely put together, balanced state budget without a tax increase. Ted, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.